you all for gathering here today. It's been an awesome conference so far. Closer? We're good now? There we go. All right, I'm Bob. This is actually a big docs reveal. Bitcoin Coder Bob, that's actually a real picture of me. I work at Voltage. I'm a backend developer. And at Voltage, we are a Bitcoin infrastructure provider. We host Lightning nodes, we host Bitcoin nodes, and we host other Bitcoin native products. And what I look into is how metrics are so important to run a good Lightning node. So what I'm going to get into today is as we bring more people onto the Lightning network, oh yeah, I forgot that, thank you. As we bring more people onto the Lightning network, it's my belief we're going to get things like larger entities, people running bigger nodes, businesses, people that represent communities, and the kind of metrics that they're going to need to run a good routing node are going to rely on metrics that maybe they're not looking at today. So we're going to jump into what I believe is why running a good Lightning node is exactly like running a good business. So let's compare how running a Lightning node is like running a business. So let's pretend we have basically a 7-Eleven, a store. It's open 24/7, and we sell items in our store, and we let people in and out as they please. Well, we can draw a direct comparison to that of when you run a Lightning node, you got to keep the doors open. You got to have it powered on. You got to have bandwidth connection. You have to have adequate storage space, not just for the Lightning node, but for the on-chain transactions if you're not using Neutrino. And you need to make sure that your node is up to date. Logistics. Every business has to handle logistics. With Lightning, that translates into having adequate capacity, having plenty of channels to handle that capacity, and making sure that you're keeping tabs on your pending HTLCs to understand where your sats are currently at. Price. Every item has a price in a store, and of course with your node, you're going to be setting appropriate routing fees, and that you can dynamically change them over time, which in turn will also change the type of customers or other nodes that are going to route through you. You want to work with other reliable businesses, and in the Lightning standpoint, that means if you're a good node, you're going to attract other nodes that want to connect with you. So I call that good nodes beget good nodes. Obviously, nodes don't want to open up with certain peers that aren't performing well. And if you're a good node, other nodes are going to notice that and want to connect with you. That goes right into attracting good customers and kicking out bad ones. If you have a peer that's not online or they're charging high fees, you're going to want to cut that node off. For example, if they're a zombie channel. And competitors. If I run a 7-Eleven and a Wawa opens up down the street, well, I have to recognize that that's going to hurt my bottom line potentially. It's the same thing on the Lightning network. As the topography changes, my influence on the network, where transactions are going to get routed, might not be going through my node anymore, and I have to make adjustments appropriately. And that goes right into location, location, location. That's a classic retail business term. It's the same thing on the Lightning node. Where you are in that topography, who you're connecting is a very important aspect of running a good routing node. So what are some of the goals that you want to accomplish to be this good node? Well, first of all, you need to have maximum uptime. You don't want to be disconnecting on anybody. You need to make sure that your resources are in check. Your CPU is not going over, you're not running out of storage, and that your bandwidth is appropriate to handle the number of messages on gossip that are happening between your node and the others. You want to minimize your hardware strain, that goes right in turn. And of course, you want to make sure that your liquidity is not only adequate, but being deployed on the proper channels and at the right time, which we'll get into. I talked about previously about you want to have good peers, and being a good peer begets good peers. And finally, your fees, which you're going to be adjusting potentially all the time. How do you set appropriate routing fees? Well, all of this begs the question, how do we do this? And I'm under the belief that just like how a big business uses many different analytics tools to gain feedback and insight, and then they adjust accordingly, the same thing applies on a Lightning node. And so one day, if you follow this properly, you'll be like one of those champion node runners that we see here on the right. There's great tooling already, great tooling. And some of you in this room maybe have developed some of these, and I apologize if you're here and your tool isn't up there. I just couldn't fit all of them. We have really good tooling. They capture a lot of great metrics already, but I do think that we have tons of room for improvement on a lot of metrics that we're not looking at. And I want to quickly say that of all of these metrics, these are implementation agnostic. Whether you're running LND, Eclair, C Lightning, or using LDK, you should be able to capture these metrics despite any of the tooling on the previous page. All right, so back to my analogy with how is running a Lightning node like a business? Well, let's break it down starting with the OS metrics. From a storage standpoint, your two biggest areas where your storage is going to come from is from hosting channel backups, as well as if you're using a full node, it's about 400 or 450 gigabytes to host all of the blockchain data right now. Until we have L2 implemented, that number is going to steadily increase as you make more transactions on a channel and the chain continues to grow over time. If you have more data on your storage, it's potentially going to run slower to load things up and your node's not going to run optimally. From a network standpoint, we're able to peer into, with the peer, how many bytes have I sent and received with this peer. So I could set something up like an alert to figure out, hey, is this peer doing an attack on me and constantly pinging me for information or spamming me with information, so maybe I want to cut ties with them. Versioning, very important. If there's a vulnerability, of course you're going to want your node to be up to date to get rid of that. And then as new features roll out, like Taproot, you're going to want to make sure that you're running up-to-date software so that you're going to be able to handle new features on Lightning Network for the implementation that you're using. And of course, electricity. Without electricity, your node's not running. Another thing you could set up an alert for is basically just a pinging service. If you're not physically near your node and you need to know, hey, is my node down all of a sudden? Do I need to go send someone out or drive home to get that back online if it's mission critical? That's an easy thing to set up. Of course, you can use a UPS to help mitigate that kind of problem. And so all of this really brings up the question, do I need to run multiple nodes? Do I really need to host everything on one node, or does it actually make more sense to spread out my resources on multiple nodes? So if I'm running into storage problems, or I'm running into bandwidth problems, if I split this up between multiple nodes, I can bear the load a lot more easily. A good example of this is with versioning. If I have to bring my node offline to upgrade my version, well, now I'm not routing transactions, I can't receive payments, and that could be a mission critical problem for me. So if I have multiple nodes, I can slowly roll out versioning on individual nodes while keeping my other ones online. And then, of course, with the electricity problem, as we bring Lightning Network to places that don't necessarily have 24/7 electricity, where they have outages during certain hours of the day, it may make sense for those companies or individuals to host their nodes geographically dispersed, maybe with a tool like Voltage. Back to our business analogy. No one's coming into your store unless you have those shelves stocked. And in the context of Lightning, that means having open channels and having good liquidity on these channels. So one of the first things we can look at is, and everybody's familiar with this, figuring out what fees you're going to be paying on chain. You can use a ratio to look at what are the fees I'm paying on L1 and how do they compare to what I'm earning on L2. There's the potential that you're basically incurring high on-chain fee costs relative to what you're earning on routing, and it wasn't worth it in the first place. The classic business decision, buy versus build, or what I call rent versus buy in this case. If I find out, for example, that I'm connected to a node, and that node is run by a company who's going to pay everybody every other week on Friday, and they're going to make a ton of payments, and they're going to be large payments. Well, then I should be smart and make sure that I have my liquidity properly balanced on that channel so that at that time on that day, I can route all the transactions that I can predictably know are going to happen. So the ways I can do that, I can either do a rebalance myself, I can maybe open another channel with them, or I can use a tool like Pool or Flow, or as we learned earlier today from the Blockstream guys, their new product that they rolled out can help with the balancing here. And then finally, there's the acceptance policy. If for whatever reason I don't want connections or peers opening up channels with me, I can go ahead and set my minimum HTLC fee so high that effectively no one's going to be able to open a channel with me. From the liquidity standpoint, we want to keep track of not only the amount of payments that are coming in on each channel, but what are the size of the payments on these channels. That can help gain insight on maybe a little bit about what the future of the transactions on that channel are going to look like, and maybe how we're going to change fees with that channel. Another thing to keep in mind is, and this is very popular in a lot of the metric tools out today, is the inbound versus outbound ratio. So essentially, how often do I need to be rebalancing this channel? Is it become a burden? Is it something I have to pay attention to every time? Or do I find that both my peer and I are exchanging almost 50-50 with each other where neither of us have to worry about rebalancing it? With spikes and inactivity, the spike example goes back to what I just talked about, the Friday payment use case. Can I expect reasonably and predict at certain times that I'm going to have to manage my liquidity because I know it's going to move in one way or the other at a certain time? And then inactivity. Do I have any way to know, if this channel is going offline, that I'm not going to be able to move sats on that channel? It's going to become dead weight capital. And then finally, zombie channels. Of course, we want to slay zombie channels. Zombie channels are just peers that have went offline. I think the general definition is about 2 weeks of being in activity that they're considered a zombie channel. This is something you'd want to set an alert for. Hey, do I have zombie channels popping up? Because you want to cut them immediately. Because for every sat you have on a zombie channel, that's capital that you're not earning a routing fee on. So you want to cut that channel off, close it down, and allocate your capital somewhere else so that you can start earning your routing fees again. Oh, these are the outdated slides. I'm not doing the health. Routing fees. So everybody wants to run a good routing node. We want to be profitable. We want to earn fees. Well, how can we gain some insight into routing fee metrics? Well, we can plot it out over time and compare it to the volume of transactions. We can take a look at if the channel that I'm opening is a lot bigger, is that affecting the amount of payments that are moving through my channel? So if I have a 1 million sat channel versus a 10 million sat channel, can I tell any difference with particular peers about how the capacity of that channel is changing the number of payments that are coming through the channel? Or are they totally uncorrelated? From Lalu on the Lightning Dev mailing list the other week, he talked about the concept of theta, which I think is really promising and cool. Basically, theta bakes into your base fees and your PPM fees the concept of the time value of money. If I have a ton of capital tied up in a big channel with a long HTLC, I should be compensated accordingly for if that channel gets tied up and I can't move sats on the channel. So if that case happens where I can't move money on the channel, it's basically dead capital. I can't earn money on it, and therefore my base fees should be set accordingly to account for that time value of money concept. So theta's not out yet, but that's a really promising feature, and I think is going to be used by a lot of different people. And then another thing, and I learned this a couple weeks ago at TabConf, shout out Michael Tidwell if you're in the room, great conference, is the concept of negative fees. So instead of having a peer pay me fees to route a payment through my node, what if I incentivize them to send a payment to my channel and I'll pay them sats for it? Okay, why would I do that? Well, it'll help with rebalancing. So this is just another really clever method to help with rebalancing. Negative fees are not possible yet, is my understanding, because they will require signed integers, and I believe only unsigned integers are being used right now. But once that comes into play, I think that really shakes up the incentive model, the fee model. On the topic of accounting, well, we've got forwarding, and that's kind of what I have the Uno reverse card here for. Well, if I'm not forwarding payments, why are they not happening? Right now, I think a lot of the insight is, okay, it just failed. Well, why? We need to look into that. That is readily available information, but not necessarily displayed in a lot of these metric tools. I want to know how often I'm forwarding and how much am I forwarding. And then, of course, I want to compare things like, based on the fees that I have, how is that changing the volume of transactions in my channel? So if I adjust my fees up, does the volume change at all? If it didn't, okay, I'm instantly more profitable. So there's probably that Goldilocks area, and Dr. Carstanato talks about this a lot, of how you change your fees going to affect where the volume is and how you can kind of find that optimum balance. One of the things you're going to want to know is, depending on which channel I'm looking at, what transactions are happening when. This goes back to my earlier example of the payday use case. So what kind of insight can I gather? Am I seeing patterns of certain amounts of payments happening at certain times, and I can allocate my liquidity properly? And then finally, a minimum payment size. So if I find that a channel is only having a lot of very small transactions, and I had a really high capacity channel, well, maybe it wasn't worth opening it, and I'd be more profitable closing that channel and opening up that channel somewhere else and earning more fees. So this slide I call Know Your Customer, everybody's favorite thing. I kid. KYC is the illicit activity, change my view. But what you can do is you can do your due diligence on the peers that connect with you and who you decide to connect with. And that's a really important thing when opening channels. You don't want to willy-nilly just pick some public key that you see on Amboss or 1ML and connect with them. You're going to want to be a little more smart about that. So you're going to want to look into things like, do they have good uptime? Because I don't want to connect with somebody that's going to have a really high flap count. Have they been around for a long time? Basically, you're going to do all these reputational scoring metrics on them. Are they well connected? Where are they in the topography of the network? Who are they connecting me with? Do they change their fees all the time, or are they pretty reliable so I can forecast out kind of what my profitability might be on this channel? And the same thing applies for not only the people that are making incoming channels with me, which I can reject, but also the channels that I want to make out with other people. And so what I really want to drive home is when you are choosing a peer, have a purpose. Don't just open a channel because you think you should have more channels. Figure out what is it adding value-wise for me. Who is it connecting me with? How does this affect my profitability? And if you don't see it as a good thing, there are more profitable places to deploy your capital. And then the last thing with peers is, well, you want to keep them accountable. So you want to check things like flap count, which basically measure how offline, it's a score of how online and offline they go. That over time decreases to basically forgive them. Is this peer a liquidity drain? Are the funds constantly just moving in one direction? That's something maybe becomes a burden in terms of rebalancing, and you don't want to deal with that peer anymore. Are they adjusting their fees a lot? Do they hold up transactions? Things that you definitely want to keep in mind and maybe even set alerts for. So really the whole gist of the talk here is that you want to capture metrics, whether that be with your own tooling, whether that means you're using the command line, or you're going to use the existing tooling that's out there and plot them over time. And what you get when you do that is you gain insight. And with insight, that's when you make adjustments, and that's when you become a more profitable node. So use the tools that are out there. And as more of us and we bring more people onto the Lightning Network, the tooling's only going to get better. The type of insights that people are going to gain are only going to get better. And the fact of the matter is, it's not an easy thing. It's a little bit of an art and a science. Because if it was super profitable and easy to do, well, everybody would be doing it, and I wouldn't be up here talking about it. So that's metrics over time. That's my presentation. Thank you all. Question in the front.
Or hold it. Oh, excellent. So I'm sat here with my node back in the UK, probably totally unbalanced. Is there tools out there that will dynamically change my fees to try and keep those channels balanced, or is it still a very manual task?
So the question was, are there tools out there that will dynamically change fees for you right now? To my knowledge, I haven't used any tools that do it. I know a lot of people write custom scripts and they don't open source them because, well, why would they give away the secret sauce that's making them money, right? If you watch, there's a good talk by Karsten Otto that I saw on YouTube where he talks about a script that he wrote where he does dynamic fee changing. And it also actually does dynamic rebalancing for him as well. And he gets into all the technicals of how that works. So that might be something you want to check out. Dr. Karsten Otto.
Thank you. A few years ago, when the Bolt specification were being drafted, I was super excited about negative fees as a concept because that's brilliant. And some of the developers working on the Bolt specification gave me two major reasons not to. I mean, the design in integer is just an implementation detail, is not really inside the protocol. But the main point was basically one, that routing algorithms that are widespread usually assume positive weight in the edges of the graph. So you could use other algorithms, but they are a little bit more complex. But that seems solvable. But the second objection was more strong, and it also applies to dynamic fee definition, and it's a privacy question. Right now, you know all the amounts into the channels of the public channels of the network. You know the amount which is locked in the channel, but you don't know the balance, of course. But if fees are reliably dynamically adjusted to the balancing in a very standard way, including negative fees, then people watching at the network and basically carroting the fees, they can probing the fees, they can very very easily probably discover real time the flow of payments. So I guess I don't know if you have any not solution or mitigation for that, because I think that dynamic fees will be really the big thing, including negative ones, but they may have privacy trade-offs.
Yeah, sure, and it also ties in a little bit about theta, what I was talking about earlier, because your theta will change depending on what that each TLC looks like. To address the first point, which was about I'm already forgetting what the first point was. But
algorithm path discovery.
Oh, right. Okay. So like Rene Picard and his whole paper that he published, which was, my understanding was that if we kept base fee 0, well, it's a very good paper of what he wrote and a very optimal way to do things from my understanding. It was a little too technical for me, but that was my takeaway from it. But the problem is that you just have to hope and want everybody to use 0 base fees. And I think anything that relies upon, well, we want people to act in a certain way, just because it may be more optimal, well, we're not all exactly rational human beings, and there might be incentives to not do that, and maybe ways to be more profitable and not do it that way. So that addresses the first point. The second point is, I'm not smart enough to answer your second question. The Bolt developers probably, the people contributing to the Bolts probably had a lot better answers than I'm going to be able to give you here. Come on, somebody give me a softball question. That was a hard one.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it. My name is Fode, and I'm very happy with my node at Voltage so far. So it's just an easy question. What are the tools you feel like maybe are underutilized, or people are not paying like attention to these little simple tweaks that will help you basically optimize your node, if anything?
Good question. I'm under the belief that LNDmon is a really good tool because it plots your metrics over time. And kind of what I was trying to hammer home here in this presentation is that gaining insight happens by looking at metrics over time. LNDmon, I think, is underutilized. I guess I can't see exactly who's running what tool. But I'm under the belief that if we start adding a lot of different metrics and plot them over time, a tool like LNDmon can provide a lot of insight.
Thank you.
Second question, if that's okay. How do you feel about Raspberry Blitz and Umbrel in terms of having nodes that potentially run larger amounts, or are they just for proof of concept, home user kind of scenarios?
What I'd say with that is, if you're running a node on the behalf of other individuals, let's say you're a business entity, well, then you have to think about, who am I accountable for? So who are the stakeholders in me running a good node then? If it's just you and you're running a node and it's just your sats, well, then you should feel free to run it on whatever you want. And if you trust Umbrel and maybe the things that happened in the last week that came out about their default password problem with ThunderHub and whatnot, yeah, listen, that's a trade-off you can make. I mean, obviously you could have mitigated that one yourself if you really ran the numbers on that one and looked into the code. I do think that there's a certain aspect of, building the code yourself, the implementation that you're running, and then running it on software or running it on hardware that maybe is a little more battle tested. But really, it's all about your security model, right? So I'm not against using Umbrels or Raspberry Blitz or Bolt. I think all those are great offerings. I haven't used any of those personally, disclaimer. But I'm absolutely not against them. I think you just have to weigh out who are the stakeholders for the stats that you're moving to make your decision on what you're going to run it on. We got one in the back. I'm all about free markets. Do what you want. I don't care.
Oh, for who's in here, I asked his stance on zero base fee. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll reiterate. Listen, if that's gonna, draw more peers that want to open channels with you, cool. Is it going to be more profitable for you? Is it maybe going to make more spam transactions, possibly? But I'm not against it. I'm totally for a free market. And if you want to run a zero base fee, go for it. But it might not be in the best interest for you.
Stance on negative base fee.
Awesome. That concept blew my mind 2 weeks ago. Granted, and the question earlier kind of touched upon it, that maybe there's some problems with negative base fees. But from what I see right now, the ability to help rebalance your channel using negative base fees is like a really cool concept. Bullish on negative base fees.
Great presentation. What does your current service look like in 3, 4, 5 years from where you are right now for letting people stand up their own nodes?
Are you referring to voltage?
Yes.
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to answer this one to Boss Man later. So I can't talk about exactly what's coming down the pipeline, but what I will say is stay tuned if you like this presentation. Definitely coming down the pipeline is other Lightning implementations. So right now we only support L&D. We are still a very small company. I believe we're 10 employees. With more people coming on, we're going to be able to support things like C Lightning and the other implementations. So that's definitely in the wheelhouse. You asked for like a pretty far time frame. I think you said like 3, 4, 5 years. That's hard to say, and that might also depend on what the Lightning Network looks like in 3, 4, 5 years, right? We want to help the stakeholders of the Lightning Network get the most out of it. And as the type of entities change that use the Lightning Network, I would imagine that our products will also cater towards that. So it's hard for me to predict that far out. What I can tell you, first and foremost, is different implementations. All right, if that's it, thanks for having me. Great conference.